It's more than an honor, it's a privilege for me to have this opportunity to say a few words about the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I truly believe that it is a legacy that has real meaning for us in this country today. I will say at the outset that I may say some things that some of you in this audience may strongly disagree with. But on a day when we are honoring Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I cannot be silent or parse words. Dr. King, the man that we honor today, said there comes a time when silence is betrayal. Our lives begin and end the day we become silent about the things that matter. I want to begin this discussion of his legacy by asking two questions. Just who was this man, Martin Luther King Jr., and what was he really all about? I raise these questions because there has been a conscious or unconscious process at work to create a sanitized version of Martin Luther King Jr. We hear a lot about the dreamer, the man who believed in nonviolence, the man who loved all people. Martin Luther King indeed was nonviolent, but he was not passive. He was intellectually gifted, but not abstract. He was indeed a dreamer, but primarily he was a doer. He preached about love, but he connected love to justice. He stated that the Negro needs not only love, but also justice. Love that does not satisfy justice is no love at all. It's merely a sentimental affection, little more than what one would have for a pet. So Martin Luther King Jr. was all about social justice. Social justice defines the relationship between the individual and the society. The individual must assume responsibility for his or her own actions, but there can be no justice if individuals only blame the society or look to the society for the satisfaction of their individual needs. At the same time, social justice demands that a society carry out its responsibility to the individual to provide a foundation for that individual to become the best person that he or she can possibly become. It is within the context of the continuing struggle for social justice that we find Dr. King's legacy. To honor his legacy, we must fight every single moment of every single day to create a society that is just, a society that is healthy. A relatively healthy society, number one, takes care of its children. Children are nurtured in a loving and caring environment. There's no tolerance for children being abused and neglected. All children are given the opportunity and the resources that they need to get the type of education that allows them to engage in what Paulo Freire called the practice of freedom, the process of transforming their world. Number two, it treats all members of the society as equals. There's no discrimination or exploitation based on race or gender or sexual orientation or the existence of a disability. There is no exploitation of people because of their socioeconomic class. There is an appreciation and an acceptance of all religious beliefs. Number three, that society that is relatively healthy takes care of its environment. It does not destroy its groundwater, its lakes and its streams with pollutants. It does not destroy the beauty of its hills by the search for minerals with no regard for the destruction that it causes. It does not take actions to destroy the delicate balance between the procurement of resources and the life of the creatures that inhabit this earth. Number 4, it takes care of its poorest elderly citizen. It makes sure that they have health care, that they have housing, that they have recreation. Number 5, it figures out a way to distribute the resources so that there would not be thousands, no, maybe millions of homeless people or poor people who cannot find housing in the richest country in the world. It does not put human beings in housing that is unfit to be inhabited by people. It's not the kind of society where people with limited needs are unable to get the health care they need to sustain their quality of life. Never has that been more apparent than today. As we're here today, and I haven't seen the numbers today, but close to 400,000 people have died from this virus. And you know, and I know, there are many thousands of them who should not have died. They died because they could not get the care that they need. They died because they were Black or brown. And there's a certain level of political power in this country that does not value their life. So many of them died because they're in nursing homes. They died because these low-income workers that we used to call them, we now call them essential workers. It's amazing how America can just change titles. And all of a sudden you go from being low income to essential, which means you go out and risk your life so the rest of us can be on Zoom. Yeah, I said it. And so if you're a society that cannot find a way to distribute resources so that how can it be that we have food lines in America? How can it be that we have food lines on one side of town and lavish feasts on the other? How can this be? And to go back to these essential workers, it's interesting that they are essential, but they're paid in the same way that they were paid before we declared them essential. That is not a just society. Number 6, we would make it clear that we will not tolerate a society where Black people fear for their lives from those whose job it is to protect us. It is not a just society. If Tamir Rice can't play with a toy gun on a playground without getting killed, it is not a just society. If Breonna Taylor is asleep in her own home and is murdered by the police, it is not a just society. If George Floyd is pleading for his life as a cop has his knee on his neck, no, that is not a just society. And so we have to be clear that there are people in our society who don't even want me to talk about what I'm talking about, or some people who feel that these issues that I'm raising are mushy liberal ideas. Some would even argue that I'm trying to promote a Democratic Party agenda. Let me be clear. I don't believe in neither one of these parties, because both of them have rubbed their hands on my head and called me boy. So this ain't got nothing to do with the small d Democratic. It has to do with the larger D Democratic, this thing that we call democracy. And so I want to be clear again that there are people who would say, well, you know, all of these things that you're talking about, I don't know if you've ever read Evicted, but if you haven't read Evicted, you should. But it's about poor people trying to get housing in the city that I live in. So there's this whole idea that, oh man, in order for us to have housing for all people, in order for us to have healthcare for all people, in order for us to have food for all people, in order for us to have decent jobs for all people. It would take too much wealth. Oh no, we don't have that kind of wealth. But we do have the kind of wealth to give the richest people in this country tax breaks. We do have the kind of wealth where people live in the White House and are what's the word, grit? I mean, when you rip people off, that's my word. We do have a way for them to rip people off while other people are in food lines. And so I agree with what a man named James Hugg said years ago. He said, the problem that we face is not the limits of our national wealth. The problem is our national economic priorities, which undermine the democratic liberties that are supposed to be our national pride. But beyond that, there's another reality that I must speak to today. The United States is not united. 74 million people voted for a man for president who is clearly racist and is an unapologetic supporter of white supremacy and taps into those forces and ideological perspectives that have been present and influential in the American body politic for a long time. The reality is, if you're going to truly celebrate Martin Luther King Jr., you can't just say, oh, he's a great man, but then we're not going to talk about these injustices. You can't say you want to be for Martin Luther King Jr. and everybody get together and sing, we shall overcome, but you don't want to talk about what's actually happening in this country at this moment in time. Let's be real. Martin Luther King Jr. believed what I believe. America is a great country, but it has never been, nor is it today, great for every American. Remember that when the Constitution was written, Black people were counted as 3/5 of a human being when it came to the apportionment of representative and taxes for the House of Representatives. The preamble to the Constitution began, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union." That struggle to form a more perfect union is clearly in evidence today. Our union today is not only not perfect, it is threatened by anti-democratic forces and forces of white supremacy. And these ideas and these forces are championed by the outgoing president of the United States of America, Donald Trump. And to all of you Trump apologists who continue to buy his lies and his disregard for democracy, January 6th ought to be a wake-up call, even for those of you who are in such a deep slumber that you can't see reality. January 6th was the outward manifestation and the what can I put this? It was the result of Donald Trump's fascist tendencies, his advocacy of bigotry, hate, violence, and racist views are clearly the existential threat to the very foundations of this democracy. Our American democracy continues to be a work in progress. We must constantly work at sustaining it and making it more vibrant, more accommodating for all of the people. This requires forceful, clear, sustained, positive leadership at all levels of our country. Leadership that provides clear and unambiguous support for all of its citizens, regardless of their race, their ethnicity, their class, their sexual orientation, or their religious beliefs. I clearly understand that in a democracy, people will have different views, but it is crucial that our leaders show a basic level of respect for people during our battles over policy. I want to say that again. In a democracy, people will differ, but differing is not the same as demagoguery and hatred and bigotry towards other people. What we have witnessed since that man walked down those steps or that escalator, whatever he took, and walked to the podium and started calling Mexican people criminals. And from that moment in time until right now, we have had a person who has been in the leadership of this government that has used real words, code words, and actions that are dividing us more than we already were. Before the insurrection on January 6th, and I'm gonna just have to be real with y'all. Like, I'm not happy, anybody who says they're happy that January 6th took place, I'm not trying to go there. But some of y'all might have remembered Gil Scott-Heron. He's got an old school, but he said that the revolution will not be televised. What he didn't say was the insurrection would be televised. He didn't know that there was going to be an insurrection. And that's what January 6th was. It was an insurrection. And it was an insurrection that is coming at the end of a period where a man has been the president of the United States, who has, in a country of immigrants, he has bombarded them from day one with negative and hateful and harmful words and actions. He has just talked negatively in the most crass ways about countries that are inhabited by Black and brown people and people of the Muslim faith. We have had young children snatched from their families and imprisoned in cages. This should never have happened in America. But we will never be able to deal with it if we keep saying that this ain't America, because this is America. It is America. And the only way you can face and deal with problems is to deal with truth. You cannot attack problems by operating in a world of illusion. And so I just want to say this. Martin Luther King Jr. believed in those precious words of the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, and we should add women, are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that amongst these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a man who could have lived a comfortable life, but instead he chose to raise his voice, to use his intellect, and ultimately he gave his life fighting for freedom, justice, and power for Black people, and for that matter, poor people of all colors. So here we are today, as we should be, to honor that man. To me, this program and all of the others that are taking place all over this country are meaningless, if all we're gonna do is have a program and be in a rush to take the pictures down before the program is even over. If that's all we're gonna do, we shouldn't even do it. We shouldn't even do it. Because to really honor Martin Luther King is to say, we're gonna take stock of, first of all, ourselves. And in a real way, rededicate ourselves to the struggle for which he gave his life. It's not enough to simply call out his name or talk about how important he was with words. In point of fact, the only way to honor a warrior is to pick up the torch of struggle that warrior was involved in. In point, the only real way to honor Martin Luther King is to continue the work which cost him his life. The battle for social justice, that was the crux of Dr. King's life, must go on. Let me again refer to the dream connotation. and because it's so often attached to Dr. King. Well, if you read his book, Strength to Love, he asked this question: what will we do when we are faced with shattered dreams? He argued against becoming bitter or withdrawing from involvement and or finally allowing fatalism to become our operating philosophy. He believed that we must have the courage to continue to battle, to fight, to make change for those who are poor and powerless in our society. And I understand that fighting for change is difficult. I understand that this is something I learned from Derek Bell. Racism is woven into the fabric of the American society. It's not something that is tangential. And Derek Bell argued in his book, Faces at the Bottom of the Well, and I believe this, that racism is a permanent part of the American fabric. And so people say to me, well, Howard, if racism is permanent, why should I get up every day to fight for it? You know why? Because you must fight for justice even when victory is not possible. Because not to fight is to co-sign on the injustice. And Martin Luther King Jr. never co-signed on the injustice. And in fact, in another part of that book, he argued and he urged us not to conform. He said we must not follow the path of comfort rather than conviction. And our conviction, wherever we reside in this country, has to push us to make sure that we do everything we can as individuals of conscience to ensure that every person has a chance in this country to realize his or her greatest worth as human beings. There are so many paths of struggle to make that happen. I could not prescribe or describe what yours has to be. Each of you, if you're on this Zoom, and I'm assuming you're on this not because somebody made you be on it or you ain't got nothing else to do, but you're on it because you actually want to honor Dr. King. And if you do, then each of us has to determine how best to follow the path of social justice. Frantz Fanon wrote a book called Wretched of the Earth. And in this book, Frantz Fanon said every generation out of relative obscurity must discover its mission and either fulfill it or betray it. Dr. King discovered his mission, and he decided with his life to work to fulfill it rather than to betray it. Because if you're gonna follow that path of Dr. King, it means every day you get up to fight for social justice. To do any less will render attendance at events like this nice, but largely of no consequence. On some positions, cowardice asks the question, is it expedient? And then expedience comes along and asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? Conscience asks the question, is it right? If ever there was a time when one must take the position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but is right, it is today. Martin Luther King did what was right. Earlier in my remarks, I said that 74 million people, by their vote, indicated support for Donald Trump as a person or for at least some of his views and actions. But an important fact to remember on Martin Luther King Day 2021, 81 million people rejected him and his views and his policies. We must build on that side of America because there are significant numbers of people in this country who do believe in social justice, who do reject white supremacy, who do reject bigotry and hatred. It is important on this day that we don't forget that side of America too. But for those of us who are on the side of justice, we must act, not talk. And now I'm getting ready to channel Sister Rosemary in my final remarks. And I end with this. Dr. King said that the ultimate measure of a person is not where he or she stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he or she stands at times of challenge and controversy. The true neighbor will risk his or her position, his or her prestige, and even his or her life for the welfare of others. In dangerous valleys and hazardous pathways, he or she will lift some bruised and beaten brother or sister to a higher and more noble life. If you follow Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., then you must adhere to those words. Thank you so very much.